to the Quiet Warrior Show, where we help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
Well, welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show. My name is Tom Dutta. I am the Quiet Warrior. I'm excited to have on the show today Mr. Mark Cuban. Hey, Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Tom.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Brian. I just want to tell everybody I've been excited to get you on the show and how we met before I turn it back to you. I was on social media and I've heard of you and I saw a little video you posted and it blew my mind. And I said, I have so many questions and thoughts about what you're doing with your story. I want to get you on and have a deep conversation. So why don't we turn it to you first, Brian? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm 58 years old. I live in Dallas, Texas. I'm a lawyer by trade. I've lived in Dallas for over 30 years, basically since I graduated law school at the University of Pittsburgh. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh. I have two brothers, a younger brother, Jeff, and an older brother, Mark. A lot of people may know Mark, owner of the Mavs and Shark Tank. I am in recovery, long-term recovery from problem drinking, alcohol, cocaine use, and two eating disorders, traditional and exercise bulimia. I've been married for over 2 years, going on 3 years now, and we've been together for 14. My wife stood by me through some very tough times. I have two cats, and I am basically now, I do no longer practice law. I've written 2 books, and I speak about breaking the stigma of mental health and addiction and eating disorders. A lot of people don't really talk about males with eating disorders when, in fact, about 25% of those with eating disorders are male, and I was actively bulimic for over 2 decades. So I really have found my passion, which was never practicing law. It is sharing my experience, strength, and hope to a person of recovery.
That's fabulous. Well, thanks, Mark. I've got your bio in front of me.
Brian.
I called you your brother's name. I've done that twice so far.
If I had $1 for every time someone did that, I'd be worth more than my brother, so you're forgiven.
That was actually a question in my lineup here about living in the shadows of somebody like your brother. We'll get to that later. I've got the bio in front of me here, Brian, and I want to just build you up a little bit. You've done a lot of public speaking and work. Something that I admire about you is you've come out with your story. You've appeared on many media, the Katie Couric show as well, being one. You've written a lot of columns, and they've been featured. Topics come up on CNN and Fox, Huffington Post, Above the Law, New York Times, and on and on and on. So obviously you become a thought leader, and people stumble into that career by accident. You started off as a lawyer. I was telling you offline that my best friend is a lawyer. I met him when I was younger and followed his career. It's interesting to me that this is where you're at and you've got this passion. So why don't you take us back? This is all about the hero's journey. Take us to the beginning. I want to know about a little of your childhood. This guy who came into the world innocent, what got you into law school, and then how did all this happen?
Sure. Well, we have to go back to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I was born, middle of 3 children. And for some context, my older brother, Mark, was, as you might expect, he was very entrepreneurial, even as a teenager, selling this door-to-door, selling that door-to-door. As an example, when the local newspaper went on strike, and this was in the 70s, he and his buddies drove to Cleveland, which is about 200 miles away, bought their newspapers, drove them back to Pittsburgh, and sold them for 10 times what they were worth on a street corner in downtown Pittsburgh. So you knew what he was going to be, and he kind of became that and a lot more. My younger brother, Jeff, was very good-looking guy, a jock, nationally ranked wrestler, the beer parties, the dates.
Yeah.
My younger brother was all of the things that I associated with love and acceptance. And unfortunately, or fortunately, it just was what it was. I was who I was. I was very middle child syndrome. I was shy. I was withdrawn. And I internalized anything negatively said to me and wore it like a skin-tight suit. Unfortunately, also, I had a very difficult relationship with my mother. And I will tell you about this, but I want the people who listen to your podcast to understand I do not blame my mother for the things that I went through. There is a difference between cause and correlation.
Yeah.
But many of the things that happen at home can correlate with mental health issues later in life. Trauma has a strong correlation to substance use issues and other problems. There was a lot of fat shaming in my household. I would come home from school, eat lunch at home, and I would love to eat Chef Boyardee ravioli right out of the can. And I would be eating it. My mother would come home from selling real estate, and she would see me doing that and say, Brian, if you keep eating like that, you're going to be a fat pig. These were the things my mother's mother said to her. These were the things my great-grandmother said to my grandmother.
Yeah.
Fat shaming in families is often handed down generationally, passed down. So these were just the tools my mother was given as a young mother in the 70s to deal with, to raise a family. There was a lot of food-related dysfunction in her family, and it happened. And she had a very mentally abusive relationship with her bipolar mother.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. I want to jump in there for a minute, Brian. I want to jump in and just, you got me going in so many directions in my head and my heart's growing here. I got to tell you that I come from a background I've shared a little with you, but there's a common story with that, what you just told me, and I'm learning from that there was that same fat shaming issue in my family. I was a heavyset kid. They actually came up with a nickname for me, which today I still have trouble taking my shirt off and letting other people see who I am. What's interesting about it is when my father passed away recently, I started thinking about why I still had this unresolved feeling. And it's the same thing. I love my mother, but there are parts of what is in there, your story, that I relate to. The last thing I want to say before I give it back to you is that I love the teaching moment. Everybody listen to what Brian said. The teaching moment, he said, I want everybody to know I don't blame my mother. When I sat down actually and I talked to my parents and I said, tell me your story, Brian, and I learned about how they grew up, particularly my father, whose dad was an alcoholic as well, I totally found forgiveness in my heart because he brought the parenting rules he learned into my home to parent me as a child. So thank you for sharing that amazing part of your life. Back to you.
Yes, and like you, I bordered on obese, and I had a nickname. It was called Beef, and it wasn't in affection. So, as you might imagine, not understanding the dynamics of family food dysfunction and all that, I grew depressed to hear these things said to me. And I began to eat more to quell the depression. And I became a bigger Brian and a bigger Brian. And as so often happens when kids change for what other kids perceive in the negative at school, in high school and middle school, the bullying started. The fat teasing, the fat shaming, telling me I needed to go to Sears to get a bra for my man boobs and things like that. And Tom, it all culminated one day. I call it the day of the gold pants. My brother Mark, and this was back in the era of Saturday Night Fever, the mid-'70s,
Oh, yeah.
My brother Mark taught disco. And he wore these outrageous clothes, which back then weren't outrageous, right? If go watch Saturday Night Fever and you see what they wear.
I still got my shoes.
Yes. And he gave me this pair of shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. They were a symbol of love from him. I love my brother. We're very close today. But Mark wasn't a big guy. They weren't tight on him. They fit him fine.
Yeah.
I had to jump up and down, spray the water bottle. My butt looked like 15 cats back there to get those pants on. But I didn't care because Mark gave them to me. My brother, I love my brother, and I was going to wear those pants to school. And I did, and the kids made fun of them. I'm walking home from school one day wearing these shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants with this group of kids, these boys, and they start making fun of them about a mile from my house along a busy street, cars just going, and they start tearing at the pants, pulling at them, and the next thing I know, they had ripped the pants off me down in my Fruit of the Looms tighty whities.
Wow.
My socks, my kids' tennis shoes.
Yeah.
They went on like they had done the funniest thing ever, throwing the shreds in the street. I went out and picked up the shreds. I had a T-shirt on. I put the shreds over my privates and waddled on home. No one stopped. People gawked. Very busy street, cars flying back and forth. I got home, and I went into our basement. And back then in Pittsburgh, we had what were called trash incinerators. They burned at a very high heat.
Yeah.
And I took those pants and I threw them in the trash incinerator, hoping to burn away, incinerate all evidence of what had happened, all evidence of my shame, all evidence of the fact that I didn't know how to stand up to bullies. And it was right around then, Tom, that I remember looking at myself in the mirror and seeing my reflection and seeing something different, seeing something that was ugly, seeing something that was monstrous, seeing something that would never be loved, never get married, never have a girlfriend, never hold a girl's hand, never get my first kiss, seeing somebody who was totally unworthy of love.
I got to jump in again, Brian. Hold, catch your breath. The story's taking me in my head again. There's so many directions. I wrote that down on my paper because it's a quote I actually created for somebody that's standing up for bullies is learning to stand up for yourself, learning to know that you're enough. And I did a lot of learning about brain science and how when we look in the mirror sometimes, even though, like you said, some people are a good looking guy, you look in the mirror and you see this ugly person, even though that's not who you are. And it's wired in our subconscious mind. So here you are, and I'm just going to replay what you said. You had these pants you get from your brother. You love your brother. You're walking down the street. They tore it off you. They did things that shamed you. You went home. You incinerated them, and you had these feelings. Now that's telling me in my mind, this stuff now is embedded in your hard drive. Tell me how you move forward from there, man.
Well, I went on to college, and I went on to Penn State University. And I was so happy to get out of Pittsburgh, get away from the bullies. And in my mind, this would be a whole new start. I would meet people. I would finally get a girlfriend. My father drove me up to Penn State, and I remember it like it was yesterday. It was the first day of moving in. I was living in a dorm. My father's helping me unpack. It's this beautiful, crisp fall day in Pennsylvania. And I'm looking out the window as my father's helping me unpack in my dorm into a parking lot. And I make eye contact with this curly brown-haired girl who was talking to some friends. I start sweating, Tom.
Wow.
In my mind, I envision my entire this girl. We're going to get married. We're going to date. We're going to get married. We're going to have 2 1/2 children. But it wasn't a smile when she looked at me, as I originally thought. It was a smirk. She looked at me. She looked back at her friend. She looked back at me. She cupped her hands over her mouth like people do to amplify a yell. And she says, ugly, ugly, for the entire parking lot to hear. It was like she had fired a bullet into my gut. Now, I am not the first kid who has had nasty things said to him. It happens all the time. It happens today. It happened then. Bullying is bullying, right?
Absolutely.
And people and kids can be cruel. That's generational. That's not something that is not generational. That's a constant. But I was somebody who already felt ugly. Another kid might have said, yeah, ugly back or whatever. I was somebody who already felt ugly. So it was just that final thing where I decided and thought to myself, my entire life was out of control. I would never be loved. I would always be this ugly monster. This girl has confirmed that. And I'm not blaming this girl. If it wasn't this, it would be that. It was environmental factors are many. It just happened to be this moment.
Yeah.
And I decided that I had to somehow get control of my life. Well, what did I have control over as an 18-year-old male? Freshman. I had control over food. That's it. But I didn't want to eat more because I associated that with the hard times with my mom and getting heavier and bullying. So I decided that if I could lose weight and get thinner, like all the kids that I saw in school who in my mind were the thin or muscular and they were dating, going to the parties, the prom king, the prom queen. This was before the internet, so my visions of popularity were the kids I saw every day.
Yeah.
And so I began to restrict my food intake and restrict and restrict and restrict. And I began to lose a bunch of weight. But every pound I lost, I would look in that mirror and I still saw this quote unquote fat pig, as my mom used to call me, as kids at school used to call me. losing the weight did not make me feel any better about myself. And I had developed an eating disorder in 1979 before anyone was talking about eating disorders publicly for men or women. And I transitioned into bulimia later that year, which is binging and purging. And every time I binged and purged, I had this feeling of peace that came over me in my gut for 15 seconds. And I can only feel it compare it to the high I would get from cocaine decades later. This feeling that the next day was going to be okay, the next day I would be loved, the next day I would be accepted, the next day my mother would love me, and she did love me. She just did not have the tools at that time to show me.
I want to jump. I want to jump in again. There's part of this story that's just where I didn't think we'd be trading stories, but let's just do it, man. That story about that one defining moment where she said what she said was interesting because when you said that, it triggered one of my stories. I remember my father drove home. He used to drive this green F-350 pickup truck. Now, of course, knowing now that my dad was in the Army, green makes sense. I was wondering why we were the only ones in the neighborhood that had a green truck. My dad pulls in, he's drunk. It's 2, 3 in the morning. That's usually when he came home. I'm lying in bed, and there was a song I used to listen to on the radio by a rock band, and the words in the song went something like this. He's home again. He's drunk again. He's bouncing off the walls again. And my dad stumbles in the house, and the next day he got up, was hungover. We're getting ready to go to school. We're in our early years. And my dad stands at the end of the driveway. We're in this middle-class neighborhood when everybody's putting their garbage out, getting ready to go. And he says, "My 3 sons are a bunch of assholes." Pardon my language. And what's funny is that I believe, I didn't know any different, but I believe what my dad said. That was one of my defining moments, and the pain of what words can do. Words matter. And then when you talk about the eating disorder, man, I honor you. I mean, I love you and your story so far. There's many people I've met, and a few of them have shared this eating disorder. I can't put myself in your shoes. I used to go to live at 7-Eleven having Slurpees and O-Henrys and go the other way, getting so fat, looking for more reasons to be fat. So keep us going in the story. Take us from how you pushed through that, and then you got into some other troubles with addiction.
Sure. Well, I didn't push through it. I was actively bulimic for over 2 decades.
Wow.
Into my 40s. But I turned 21 and I began drinking heavily at Penn State. I became a quote-unquote alcoholic as a sophomore going into my junior year at Penn State, drinking every night, showing up to class drunk, because I instinctively moved towards deadening my feelings. If I couldn't change how I felt when I looked at myself in the mirror, I would deaden how I felt. So I didn't want to feel anything.
Yeah.
And that is one of the reasons I reflect on looking back in the transition to problem drinking. And so before you know it, at Penn State, I'm an alcoholic, I'm bulimic. I began running excessively, 10 miles a day, 20 miles a day. I got into marathon. I became exercise bulimic. And for those who don't know what that is, it is obsessive compulsive exercise for the primary purpose of offsetting calories.
Yeah.
And so I'm dealing with exercise bulimia, traditional bulimia, and now I'm drinking heavily. Not quite the resume for success on any level.
Not quite.
And back then, there really wasn't a lot of help. It was very stigmatized. We don't have the conversations like we do today. Even today, it's stigmatized.
Yeah.
But back then, on college campuses, which are still sobriety adverse,
Yes,
there wasn't any talk of it. I had not heard of 12-step, and the most well-known 12-step of AA the most well-known 12-step for alcohol is Alcoholics Anonymous.
correct.
But interestingly, I remember back then, Tom, walking into a hamburger joint, drunk, of course, and coming upon this rack of pamphlets called the 20 Questions that are put out there by the 12-step groups.
Yeah.
And they are geared towards college students, and it said, if you answer this many questions in a positive, you may have a drinking problem. And I'm checking them off, yes, yes, yes. And I thought to myself, I'm just a college student. I don't have a drinking problem. Throw it in the basket. Crumple it up, throw it in a basket. That was about as close as I came to self-awareness about my drinking issues as a student at Penn State. So I was able to get through Penn State, doing okay because as a quote unquote, although I hate the term for context, as a high functioning student alcoholic. I was a criminal justice major. I wanted to be a police officer. That would have worked out well, right? I'd have been the first person in the evidence room trading out the mannitol for the cocaine. But I'm sitting in the placement office of my major, criminal justice, and I'm looking through police officer jobs. And there were two guys sitting there, and they're talking about going to the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. I knew them. They were from Pittsburgh. And all these bells start going off in my head. I had never thought of being a lawyer. There are no lawyers in my family. I didn't know any lawyers then. But here's what the bells were about. I could stay in school for 3 more years, and I could binge and purge, I could drink, and I can run and engage in the same behaviors that got me through Penn State. That's the only thing that went off in my head. Not that I wanted to be a lawyer, not that I wanted to be Atticus Finch or anything like that, that I could repeat the behaviors of survival that allowed me to survive day to day, moment to moment at Penn State University, because that is all I knew, Tom. That is all I knew.
Yeah, I think you answered the question I had written on my paper here wanting to ask you, which is why law? I have friends in that profession. They say many people stumble into their professions, Brian. They don't discover you used the word passion. I can't remember if it was offline or earlier in the conversation, but they say a lot of people, there's good science behind this, that when they discover their true passion, why they're put on the planet, they're afraid of it. Doesn't pay the bills, or maybe it's a new journey. So you get into this law school, you're this functioning alcoholic student. There you are. Take the jump from there to you're now into the field of law. You become a lawyer, and then you talked about cocaine. So you got into some other difficulties with that. And then I want you to also tell us about mental health, because I'll just set it up this way, that I've spent 10 years as a chair on a not-for-profit in the field of mental health. I think I shared with you privately, but I've talked about it openly on my show, that I have a younger brother who has Tourette syndrome. I've struggled openly with anxiety, and now recently understanding the depression cycle I can experience myself. There's been loss of through suicide in my extended family, and so many leaders, CEOs, executives, that's my network, who live in quiet desperation. My father was in AA for 23 years. I can call you back and do another show on that whole thing, because there's so many debates about the treatment of alcoholism to everything from
Tom, let's be clear. AA is not treatment. It's a mutual aid.
Okay, great. That's what my dad used to say. It's a support group. Dad went through 23 years of that. But one of the things I learned when he met with me and we found peace before he passed away unexpectedly, is that his own childhood was full of rife and anger and things from an alcoholic father. But I think he struggled with mental health. In the work I'm doing, what I've seen is a lot of people who are homeless or are addicted. They're behind that is also the threads of mental health. So I've said a lot there, but tell us about that part of your journey.
Sure. Well, as you might imagine, I was able to graduate from Pitt Law at the bottom of my class. I barely graduated, barely. And so I wanted to get out of Pennsylvania. I moved to Dallas, Texas, and this was 1986. I took the PA bar and just packed up and took a Greyhound bus to Dallas. And I moved in with my brother. Both my brothers lived here. So I wanted to be with them because I knew they loved me and did not judge me. And in the summer, and I hadn't taken the bar exam yet, and in the summer of 1987, Tom, I discovered the one thing that I finally looked in the mirror, and I looked at that guy and said, I love that guy. Everyone loves that guy.
That's awesome.
Mother loves that guy. And what do you think that was? Cocaine.
Wow.
I did my first line of cocaine in a bathroom in downtown Texas, and the feeling was nothing I had ever experienced, because I had spent an entire lifetime, not a long lifetime at that point, but an entire lifetime not loving myself, hating myself, with this empty pit of hatred and self-loathing in my stomach. And all of a sudden, this feeling of self-love swooped into my stomach. Wow. I became psychologically addicted to cocaine. Not physically dependent. Those are two separate things.
Yeah.
But I would become physically dependent to a degree. And I became psychologically addicted, and then psychologically dependent, and then physically dependent to cocaine, because I had to have that feeling again and again and again. Cocaine and alcohol took over my life. I failed the Texas bar exam 2 times, both times related to drug and alcohol use being more important to me than passing the bar. I had a window of a successful lawyer, as a successful lawyer financially, but not as a successful lawyer ethically. It was becoming, I was doing a lot of cocaine, drinking a lot, and walking the ethical line of law practice in order to fund my drug and alcohol use. And as you might imagine, reputations get around, and I eventually had no clients left. And in the 2000, I went to work for my brother, Mark. He put me to work for him, and I failed miserably at that because it didn't change the fact that I had a drug and alcohol problem, and families struggle with that. My family's no different.
Yeah.
Right? What do we do? Do we support them? Do we not support them? I am cloaked in privilege, Tom, and I acknowledge that. I am cloaked in privilege now. I was cloaked in privilege then. How many people have a billionaire brother who loves them dearly, willing to make sure that he's not living under a bridge?
Oh, you're blessed. There's no question.
I am. And I acknowledge that the vast majority of people struggling with drug and alcohol issues do not have that privilege that I had. I have always had health insurance. I have always had the support of my family. That is privilege. So I failed miserably at that. And in the summer of 2005, I became suicidal. In my mind, I would never be loved. In my mind, I was a stain on my family name, and I would be doing my family a favor by ending my life by suicide. And I obtained the means, and I had a plan, so I was in that crisis stage. And I was very lucky because a very good friend who I emailed some disturbing things to did not mind his own business, and that is one of my catchphrases that I learned from another wonderful lawyer here in Dallas, Texas, Terry Bentley. He did not mind his own business. He reached out to my brothers, and the next thing you know, they're in my house. I'm in my bed. There's cocaine everywhere. I was also misusing Xanax, and I'm zonked out of my bed. There's a .45 automatic on my nightstand. And they took the weapon, they cleaned up, and they took me on my first of 2 trips to a local psychiatric hospital, kicking and screaming. I'm a lawyer, so in Texas, in the U.S., here in Texas, they can't hold you if you're not a danger to yourself or others. So much to the chagrin, and I knew what to say, much to the chagrin of my brothers, they couldn't hold me. So my brothers drove me back home, took my car keys, and said, stay in your house for 2 weeks and everything will be okay. That was what I call the Cuban rehab.
Yeah.
My family's no different. They didn't understand. They're learning as they go. They're trying to save my life.
Yeah.
And all I can think of was leave me alone. And the other thought I had was, no problem, my drug dealer delivers. So that, as you might imagine, that was not a successful 2 weeks. The party just came to me, and then I'm back out. And the only thing I learned from that was now they know. And now I have to distance myself from my family and only hang out with the people who won't judge me and understand me, the people I use cocaine with and drink with.
Yeah.
Other lawyers, other very successful people, and but they don't judge me, right?
Right.
So that went on, and I isolated even more. January of 2006, I was out celebrating my birthday in January. Every birthday, Tom, was a 2-week period, whether it was in Dallas, Vegas, Miami, when the cocaine started and the cocaine ended.
Can't imagine. What a party.
Yep, those were my birthdays. And this one happened to be at a local Dallas bar.
Yeah.
And so these people walked in. This girl came in, and we started talking, and I'm drunk and just slobbering, but I guess she saw something. She was not a drug user, social drinker. They had been out and just happened to stop in. We started dating. I was able to wear some masks to fool her. And we get really good at those masks in addiction, but they become harder to wear. And the deeper in we get, the tougher they are to wear for any length of period of time. and my masks were wearing off, but I was able to put on some airs in that room. So we began dating. And I remember, Tom, when we started dating, then she was moved in with me. And a friend who I did a lot of cocaine with said, how are you going to use cocaine? She doesn't use drugs. And I said to him, well, this will cause me to stop. Right.
Yeah. Not.
If only it was that easy.
I want to jump in again, Brian. I'm making notes madly here. Conversation has taken me again in different directions. First of all, wow. I mean, I like that. I always quote that cartoon I used to watch every year. You watch it with my daughter. She's growing. She's in university now, back on the eastern side of the country. But the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, that scene where his heart grew 3 times. My heart is growing multiple times listening to your story, man. And here's the thing. I was thinking about brain science again when you're talking about addictions. I'm just going to throw some things out here and then get back to you, keep going. And one is about peptides, how the peptides in our brain, they create this rush. I understand it's a chemical rush that feels like cocaine. And we can be in a situation where we're addicted to something and, break free of those chains. And the brain says, wait a minute, where's that rush? That was the normal. And we go looking to screw it up and get back to it. Breaking the addiction of cocaine, I can't imagine your situation. I can't even put myself in it, so I won't even begin to make judgment. I have, sadly, a couple of cases of people connected very close to me. One who was found dead in a Starbucks washroom by a family member, and the other one who actually got into treatment, cleaned themselves up. But what I've been told is that the addiction of cocaine, it's something that's a lifelong journey, that there's many relapses. So having said that, if we believe and it holds true that the brain creates peptides, or there is a natural process to want us to go back to that addiction, you found something that brought you this euphoric state or this happiness that wasn't there before, and now you've met somebody who isn't a user. How do you unravel all that and stay clean and get back to a reasonable life?
Well, everything came to a head in she'd go away for the weekend, and I went to a guy's bachelor party who is now doing 3 years in federal prison. Those friends, that's another thing from drug use. You see a lot of that. But the next thing I know, it's 2 days later, I had a drug and alcohol-induced blackout. She's looking down at me. I'm in bed. She has come home. There's drugs everywhere. There's alcohol everywhere. I think she's trying to figure out if she walked in the right house because she didn't know about this stuff. And I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to put my head to clear and figure out what lie I can tell to explain this orgy of evidence. I may not be the person she thought I was.
Right. I got to say, I just had this explosion in my head. She didn't know about all this. Oh my gosh. So she walked into it. That's unbelievable.
Yeah. She suspected, I think she suspected, but when you love someone, it's one of those things you brush off, right? You hope it's not true.
Yeah.
And so you find reasons, confirmation bias reasons not to believe it. That's what love does.
Yeah.
Love makes it easy to hide stuff.
Yeah.
So all I can think of was to ask her to take me back to the psychiatric facility to buy some time, kind of running home to mama. And her response was, you've been to a psychiatric facility before? Yeah, there's some other things you don't know. We'll talk about that. So she takes me down to the facility. We're standing in the parking lot. And it was in that parking lot that I had a few epiphanies. One, there wouldn't be a third trip back because I'd be dead. Two, she was probably going to leave me. And she didn't leave me, Tom. She stood by me. And we dated for over a decade while I rebuilt the broken trust and found recovery. And we're now going on 3 years married. So relationships won't always survive these things, but they can. But I had to do the work, and I couldn't do it for her. I had to do it for me because life happens, right?
Absolutely.
Whether she stays or goes, I have to do it for me.
Congratulations, by the way, on that. And, maybe the show, I was talking to you about the Quiet Warrior Award that we're going to induct you into the Quiet Warrior tribe here. There's some unsung heroes you're just talking about on this show. One is this lady, and I know you'll tell us her name if you're open to that.
Sure, her name's Amanda.
Amanda, congratulations on your strength and courage and love. Again, I was telling you about a quote I did about bullying, and a co-author or an author, a friend of mine, wrote a book called Rotund Roland, and it was a story about a guy who had gigantism, and he was bullied in school, and it wasn't until one a girl came in his life and stood up for him, or actually showed him how that she loved him, that it made that shift. And that is such a teaching moment on your show, and it's one I'm going to put out there as a teaching moment for parents. I'm a parent, that love heals all things. If you have people in your life who are hurting, love is one of those tools. We don't talk about it a lot. So congratulations on that. I want to ask you, though, to when you take it back and just move forward to the rest of the story, and then I want to talk about your book as well, which you've written about faith. Does faith come into this? Are you a religious man at all?
I consider myself, there was a time when I didn't even consider myself spiritual, but I'm reevaluating that. I'm a humanist. I'm Jewish, but I wasn't bar mitzvahed. I wasn't raised religiously, but we've lost family in the Holocaust. I have a very strong cultural tie to my faith, not so much religious. I just wasn't raised that way, and I consider myself humanist in my beliefs.
Gotcha.
That if I pay it forward, continuing to do the right thing, whatever happens at the end will be okay.
Awesome. So there you are, Brian, and you've found this beautiful person, Amanda, and you're making some progress. Just tell us, if you can, in a couple minutes, how you cleaned all this up, because I know that you've done something.
Sure.
And then I want to talk about the book, the second book in particular. I'm going to let you tell us where to get it. It's going to be a read. I'll have on my list high up. Tell us about those things.
Sure. I began my recovery in 12-step, and again, AA is the most well-known. I've been in therapy for 15 years, dealing with all the underlying trauma, because 12-step is about staying sober.
Yeah.
The mutual aid 12-step is about the support of staying sober. It's not about the story, right?
Yes.
I'm in therapy to deal with the story. So I've now been in recovery 12 and a half years, and I'm always trying to recover more and have a better perspective on recovery every day. I wrote my first book, Shattered Image, and that was about my struggle with body image and male eating disorders. And then I realized that from an addiction standpoint, there really wasn't a talk about mental health struggles within the legal profession. And for context, in the US, we have a 21% problem drinking rate. 21% of all lawyers are quote unquote alcoholics, however you define that on the scale. Compare that to about an 11.5% general rate in the US. So that's over twice. If you are a millennial lawyer, the problem drinking rate, a millennial male lawyer, the problem drinking rate goes over 33%. If you were a female millennial lawyer, it goes up to 40%. So, and we have high rates of suicide, depression, etc. So it was an unmet discussion that I decided to meet. So I wrote The Addicted Lawyer, Tales of the Bars, Booze, Blow, and Redemption. It got written up in the New York Times in a story. And so that is kind of where my path has taken me, from being a lawyer to helping lawyers.
That's amazing. Congratulations on the book. I will mention it again at the end and encourage people to get it. I know it's available on audiobook as well, which is probably the one I'm going to get. I want to talk just briefly about mental health again, because it's a passion. I don't understand the stigma, but I've lived in the stigma. I'm now advocate for lifting the stigma. I want to tell you some things I've been working with that I think the United States may be trying to move in this direction, or already is. So maybe you can comment. There are two trains of thought about addiction to cocaine, heroin, these substances. We've had the opioid crisis and all of that, and so Canada federally approved the first safe injection sites. In fact, the organization.
You can hear me applauding over here.
Yeah, I know. I was reading about that. I was thinking, finally, I found a guy who's going to go nod his head. I want to talk about that for a minute. And I might introduce you to the executive director who runs the organization.
I am 100% in favor of safe consumption facilities, safe consumption services. 100%.
All right, fantastic. Well, basically, I wanted to share an experience just to connect to your story for the audience to learn more. That my first tour of one of those sites was dramatic. And I met a guy who actually has gone on to be a speaker. He's married, but he spent 40 years in what's called the downtown east side. Now, if you come to Vancouver, I'm going to take you personally in my car for a tour down there. It's horrific. Every city has its downtown east side. This is an area where all of the people who struggle with addictions, homelessness gather, and they live. And he lived in that 2-block radius for decades. Amazing. And he told me when I met him that he died 6 times over from overdose. And so I went into the safe injection site, and I stood and I looked down the corridor, and there were all these chairs and cubicles, and they were basically helping these people, these addicted people, take their drugs. And they had the Narcan kits and all the things standing by. And he told me that he was in one of those chairs and he overdosed and died. And it wasn't until the nurse brought him back. And then he said he held her, he looked at her, and he cried. And he said that the moment that an addict sees that somebody cares about them, and then they can begin feeding them information about how to maybe get into treatment, he said that's the moment when there's possibility for redemption. So,
do you mind if I correct you on some terminology?
Yeah, please do.
What we try to get. I'm very big in the impact of words, and there is data on this, and I can provide it to you. We try to move away from calling people in terms of advocacy and referring others as addicts. It's a person with substance use disorder.
Okay, great. I appreciate the insight. Send me that information too.
I will. There is data on this.
All right, that's awesome. So he's gone on and he's gone in to live a normal life. And what I'm seeing with this issue of mental health is I'm still seeing at the top level of leadership. I believe that the top level of leadership in the country, people like you, like your brother, business owners, entrepreneurs, CEOs, a lot of these people run the world. They run companies. They're responsible for the leaders in their companies and people. And many of them live with issues, substance abuse issues, mental health issues. I was a CEO and it was lonely at the top, but the pressures just of the job, and then weave in the trauma from a childhood. And I work with some of these people in peer groups, and you hear the stories seeping out onto the table in round table. And yet there's still that stigma. Here you are, and I applaud you, and that's why we're awarding you on this show, Brian, talking about it, sharing your story to change the world in that area. So leave us with this before we move to wrapping this up with you. And that tell us what people can do to carry this passion, this cause that you have to make the world a better place in this particular area.
Sure, I'll give you 2 easy things. 1, take a mental health first aid class. 2, take a Noxalone class and carry Noxalone. Save
Awesome.
a life.
Awesome. And you just nailed it. One of those on the board where I sit, they've trained all of us on how to use that in case we come across somebody who needs the help. That's fantastic. So
I have 2. You can't see it, but I have 2 right here next to me.
Yeah, everybody in studio here, Brian and I are connected by technology, and I'm seeing him. He's wearing a baseball cap. He's in his home, and yeah, that's absolutely
go Mavs.
Yeah. Well, there we go. What other team would you have on there? I want to ask you a question. Might be a bit controversial, but you're totally out there. You know, they say some people, especially I've heard this from actors who become very successful. They can't handle that success, that extreme success. But some actors have fathers in the business or other family members who are more successful, or they're always in the shadows. You know, here you love your brother. He's an amazing man. I've really looked up at some of the things he's done. I've learned from some of the things I've seen about his work. Has that ever been difficult, being in the shadows of your brother?
I mean, difficult has a lot of different. Difficult can mean a lot of different things. Let's make this clear. I am responsible for my own self-image. I am responsible for my own identity. That's not Mark's problem, right? That is not Mark loves me as his brother. Mark has his own life. I don't blame anything Mark's gone through for any problem I've had. As a practical matter, I was using cocaine and I was a problem drinker and I had an eating disorder long before Mark became internationally famous. Now, that said, I did not have a self-identity. That's not Mark's fault. That is my issue. So when Mark became internationally famous, all of a sudden, I could date girls half my age when I was deathly afraid of even approaching a girl unless I was high. All of a sudden, I could walk into bars. All of a sudden, people wanted my autograph for God knows what reason. All of a sudden, people in bars walked up and put cocaine in my pocket. So having no identity of my own, unable to even look at myself in the mirror, it made perfect sense to me to be that. Wow, I can be Mark Cuban's brother, and people who would never look at me will now like me. That is not Mark's fault. That was my issue.
Well, thanks for your candidness, your perspective. I love your honesty. It's one of the things I see in you as a natural, the leadership trait, being able to have that humility. I've been to your website, by the way. We'll get you to tell people about that. I've seen your stuff, and you stand on your own, my friend. One of the things that I really admire about your story, Brian, is that in your story there are so many threads to so many social issues, leadership issues, business issues. I mean, you're a man who, I remember I had a mentor who inspired me to write my book, and she said, very few people, professionals at a high level, will step out of the shadows and tell their story. So I want to honor you with some leadership words here. I write these down as you're speaking. They're not scripted. The first one is character. You are a man of character. Courage, no question about it. Love, I mean, it comes out of you, even in the endearing way you talk about the people that have helped you or you've come across your path. Heroic. I believe in The Hero's Journey by Joe Campbell, and you said you've read the book, and the narrative of the shows about that. That we come to a point in our lives where we step into the unknown, usually when something not so good occurs in our life. But we have to become a hero. We have to go and do something different, and then we come back. We come back as a shaman or a guide to change.
Every journey has heroes, villains, and allies, right?
Absolutely. Two more words: resilience. Oh man, the ups and downs of your story, and then vulnerability. I think you know this, but you have no difficulty being vulnerable. And if we can teach leaders in the world that it's a strength, that would be a great thing.
Absolutely. People connect with authenticity and vulnerability.
Absolutely.
And they know when you're not.
Yeah, they do, especially a guy like me. I'm what we call a blue personality in the science I teach, and I know when somebody's BSing me. So I want to mention the book. It's a compelling title. It's a bestseller, The Addicted Lawyer, Tales of the Bar, Booze, Blow, and Redemption. It's an unflinching look back on Brian's journey through addiction, mental health, and how it destroyed his career, etc., and then the redemption. I want to get you now, Brian, to tell us where about your website, where to get a hold of you. I know you do speaking, and
Sure.
That'd be awesome.
My website is www.briancuban.com. I blog. You can see every place I'm speaking. I also have a little 1-minute video thing that I do that we talked about now, covering subjects of the week. You can also contact me. I'm very accessible at Brian with an I at addictedlawyer.com.
Fantastic. And everybody go and get that book and read it. I'm going to make a commitment publicly to read it and post a review for you, Brian. Also, Brian's a speaker. So in your organizations, and in particular, he and I were talking about his profession, the legal community, many threads of the stories in those communities. If you're listening to this, you're from that community, reach out to Brian.
Sure. And I also speak at mental health nonprofits and treatment centers and things like that. And you can look at every place on my website where I've spoken and where I am speaking.
That's fantastic. Well, there's a lot of things I'm going to be able to help you with. So, Brian, on that note, I'm just going to reach out to our audience again. Give this show, find it on your favorite podcast channel. Give it a high rating so we can honor Brian's incredible story and live the life that you deserve and desire. Find your true passion and live with that purpose like you hear from Brian. And hey, Brian, the last word from you. Come back again and talk to us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. I'd love to.
All right. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you for listening to The Quiet Warrior Show. Create is a motive-based leadership development firm. www.kreat.ca